Hello and welcome to the Action Network Podcast, UFC Betting Preview. I'm Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward to help you break down this weekend's card in Nashville. 12-fight card. We're going to give you our best bets, favorite underdogs, top props, and more. And if you'd like to tail some of the bets that we discuss on today's show, you can find quick slip links both in the podcast and the video description, or visit actionnetwork.com/betnow. Main event, a heavyweight bout between Derrick Lewis coming in at about a plus 250 underdog against Tallison Teixeira, minus 300. This fight is minus 1,000 to end inside the distance. The over under 1.5 rounds, sitting at about plus 185 to the over, minus 225 to the under. Teixeira getting a very quick main event spot here, just 2 UFC bouts, including one on Contender Series. He's never been past the 4-minute mark in his professional career, just 8 career fights. Lewis this is his 13th main event or 5-round fight in the UFC. This is 30th career UFC bout. He has 15 career knockouts in the UFC, which is a record. Again, Teixeira has 8 career fights. So the experience differential is substantial. Teixeira is the bigger athlete, the faster man, though, 4 inches taller, 4-inch reach advantage, and also about 14 and a half years younger. And as we regularly cite on this show, when there is that substantial of an age gap between MMA opponents, the younger fighter is typically undervalued. There's at least a decade between UFC opponents. The younger fighter wins about 12% more than the market expects. There are close to, I think there's about 99 fights where there's a 14-year age gap between opponents, and the younger fighter is 77 and 22. So winning at about a 77% clip compared to average odds of minus 140 when there's at least a 14-year age gap. When it's closer to 10 years, it's closer to a 70% clip. But ultimately, the way I'm betting this fight is for Teixeira just to start out a little bit more measured early on against such a powerful knockout artist. The over half a round combined with Teixeira is minus 116 on a same game parlay, which I think is pretty good value. But you could combine that with the under 4.5 rounds as well and ultimately get plus money on that ticket. So a same game parlay, Teixeira over half a round, and the under 4.5 rounds. Can't finish the fight in the first 2.5 minutes, but has to finish the fight before the final 2.5 minutes. And ultimately, I do think he gets Lewis in the latter half of round 1 or the early part of round 2. How I think he does it? In the clinch with knees to the body. Lewis typically pretty durable to the head, but the knee or any strikes to the body, any strikes to the legs do tend to wear on him attritionally and wear him down fairly quickly. So obviously, puncher's chance as he does against any opponent. I just do think, given the spot, given the age gap, given the athleticism differential between these two, Teixeira is likely to finish him. And I think even on the money line, Teixeira, I would parlay him probably up to minus 300. That said, a guy who's never been out of round 1 looks like he should be able to sustain it given his athleticism. But Billy, any thoughts on live betting Derrick Lewis after round 1 if he's able to withstand some damage just because of the experience upside? I know he's not a guy who's likely to last super long into the fight, but he did pull off a come-from-behind knockout in his last win. Do you think there's a chance he could do that again in this fight against the guy who's both relatively inexperienced but also has never been out of the first round?
Yeah, I mean, that would make some sense to me. Also, famously had the last-second knockout of, was that Volkov or Pavlovich?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, Volkov. So, it's in the wheelhouse. He doesn't do a lot, right? Like, he throws single heavy shots, and you can kind of do that for a long time, even if you're tired. You can still throw your arm once, Not a very, cardio-intensive style, so a guy who's going to fade as much as we normally think of with power punchers. That makes some sense to me. I'm actually taking a little bit of a sprinkle at Derrick Lewis's money line, though. It's a huge step up for Tallison Teixeira. His best opponent before getting to the UFC was 2-1. The guy he fought on the Contender Series was a former welterweight who hadn't fought in 4 years and then was fighting heavyweight. So clearly just fed to Teixeira. And then he beat Justin Tafa in his UFC debut. We have no idea if he actually looks athletic or good against anyone competent. Not that there's a ton of great heavyweight MMA fighters around to prove that against, but Derrick Lewis, just a big step up. Interesting stat I heard from a former colleague of ours, Dan Tom. Lewis is 3-0 against fighters 6'7" or taller, which is probably pretty noisy, but basically he can get up there. He can reach with that big overhand right. I think the way he punches and the way he kind of loops actually does lend to him landing better against taller fighters than when he has to throw in a straight line or down at opponents. So I don't think it's totally just variance. There's obviously a little bit of, just happenstance in that stat. The other bet, and I like this one considerably more than my Lewis sprinkle, is the fight to start at round 2 at plus 110. 100% agree with you. Teixeira should come out fairly cautiously here, stay at range, just kind of look to pick him apart and build some cage time, right? Like, you're already in a main event. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're fighting for a title with like 8 total minutes of UFC experience. That hasn't gone well when it's happened with guys we've seen like Sergey Pavlovich, very limited cage experience, did not go well against upper level opposition. So if I'm his camp, I'm telling him like, hey, take your time, build some experience, get a feel for what you're doing, play it safe. Not that I think Derrick Lewis is going to play it safe or has even the ability to do so if he wanted to, but if Teixeira is controlling the range, he's got that height and reach. I think, it plus money for a fight to even start round 2. That's a fun one. Last little note on Derrick Lewis. I said in my luck ratings this week, we have no idea if he's even like been training before a fight at any given moment. Like, sometimes he just shows up and doesn't really care. We're recording a little bit later, and the fight's on the East Coast, so we already saw weigh-ins. He looked pretty good. He looked like he's at least been exercising. I can't say for sure that he's, putting in tons of rounds on the mats or whatever, but he's not. He's gone for a jog. He might be lifted some weights and hit a bag, so that's also a slight positive for Derrick Lewis. But again, we never really know.
I think Lewis's best chance is actually for him to start super aggressive, particularly if Teixeira is going to start a little bit conservatively. We often see Lewis, when he's backing up, get picked apart, get beaten up a little bit. That's when he's taking the attritional damage. In these main events, when he's fighting guys, I think back to the Daukaus fight, when he's fighting guys who are a little bit less experienced than him, who he can bum rush and just scare the crap out of, because you're like, oh my God, this guy has the most knockouts in UFC history and he's running at me. Why is he running at me? And I think that would just scare absolutely any of these guys, but especially the guys with less experience, who have under 10 professional fights. You put them in there against this prolific knockout artist and he starts rushing them. I think it can cause some panic. So if Teixeira is a little bit more conservative in this fight, I think if Lewis starts aggressively, he might be able to get in there and potentially hurt him. Just looking back at Teixeira's past fights, he's very much willing to take one in order to give one. Derrick Lewis is not the kind of guy that you do that against in the pocket. So very aggressive, pressure-oriented fighter. When he amplifies the pressure, that is going to be the main question in this fight, because I don't think he's going to be as aggressive from the opening bell as he would be. But that actually may be to his detriment, because Derrick Lewis could be the aggressor from there and potentially cause him problems. That said, I'm very impressed by, we haven't seen him against this level of competition, but just watching him move around the cage, I think Teixeira moves very well. I think he's a very good athlete with a ton of potential. Whether he can sustain that movement, that athleticism, that quickness into the second, third, fourth rounds, we have absolutely no idea. Only the people in the training room with him really do. But he does seem to have the tools to be a potential player in this division. It's just a matter of getting more experience and proving it inside of the cage. Let's move on to our favorite underdogs on this card, because there's a few that we've really got circled that we're particularly interested in. I'm sorry, we're going to move on to our fight of the night for this weekend. Another big age gap between Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Gabriel Bonfim, about another 14-year difference in age between these two fighters. Bonfim minus 460 on the money line, Wonderboy about plus 350. This fight, though, is relatively normal to go to a decision, about plus 130 GTD, minus 180 NZITD, which roughly lines up with the welterweight divisional average. We're both looking at Bonfim to potentially win this fight early, though, against a much older opponent. He is typically a fast starter, and the cardio tends to fade the longer the fight goes. Really powerful early on, but also able to transition from hurting his opponents into throwing on submission attempts from those wobbles, those knockdowns quickly thereafter. So I do think the prices on Bonfim to win by submission maybe a little bit short, because he does tend to go from hurting opponents to trying to submit them relatively quickly. I actually think there may be some value on his knockout prop here, but we both like Bonfim to win in rounds 1 or 2 at plus 125. I think you could take a round 1 stab as well at plus 250. And then after round 1, if he's not able to put Thompson away, I would be interested in betting Wonderboy live after round 1, primarily because even in his fight against Joaquin Buckley, Wonderboy was winning minutes in that matchup. And if he's not going to get grappled, or if Bonfim is not going to have success grappling, and this fight does extend, plays out on the feet, I think Wonderboy remains a tricky stylistic matchup for any fighter. He goes against 3-inch reach advantage, that very awkward bladed style. But if Bonfim is able to grapple, he should be able to cover his price tag here. So you're in agreement, Bonfim, round 1 or round 2 at plus 125. And do you have any interest in live betting Wonderboy after round 1 if he's still there?
Yeah, maybe. I think I'd probably wait till I want to see how the grappling looks. I'm just really concerned. Thompson has been taken down in 5 straight fights. He's 1-4 in those fights. He really should be 0-5, but Kevin Holland kept taking him down and then just letting him up because they promised to not take each other down or whatever. Like, because he just did Kevin Holland stuff. That's the only fight that Thompson has won since 2020, so almost 5 years at this point. Not a great sign, especially since he's been finished in the last 2 and is 42 years old. So I'm not going to go out of my way to make sure I get a live bet in on Stephen Thompson. If it looks like he's defending some takedowns or getting back up after 1 or 2 and we get a big price, I kind of need both those things to happen because I want to see those takedowns wear on Bonfim, right? Like Bonfim spend a bunch of energy but not get a lot out of them and then they have to keep fighting. That's the scenario I think where he could take over. But, you know, Bonfim won a decision against Angelusa, looked pretty good. His cardio looked better in that fight. I think he's improved and made himself a little bit more patient and a little bit more, I don't know, just paced himself a little bit better since his early UFC run. He came in as an undefeated fighter who had finished like pretty much everyone he had ever fought. Of course, you're going to come out guns blazing. Took that loss late in the fight against Nicholas Dalby. I think that really helped him kind of just retool what he's doing here, which is why I like having the round 2 in there and not just round 1, and why I'm not entirely convinced that I'm going to live bet Stephen Thompson unless a very specific scenario plays out.
Let's move on to our favorite underdogs for this week. I tried to get to it a touch early before our fight of the night. We'll go there now. My top underdog. Excited. Yeah, absolutely. You know what? Let's start with a guy that you've bet on in the past, and I'm curious if you're interested in betting on Austin Lane again this weekend because it is a big juicy number at about plus 500 against Vitor Petrino, and Petrino has generally been a fraud in the UFC. He couldn't finish Tyson Pedro. He lost as a big favorite against Anthony Smith, got KO'd by Justin Jacoby. He was even losing his fight to Marcin Praggnio before getting that round 3 finish in that fight. So going against Austin Lane, who's a bigger man, 3 inches taller, 3-inch reach advantage, 4 inches taller, moving up to heavyweight against Lane, who is not the best fighter, but I think capable of at least surviving and hanging around with a guy who's moving up from light heavyweight. I do think there's a skill advantage, obviously, for Petrino. The line reflects that. But overall, he just doesn't seem to have the aggressive finishing mentality that you would expect from a guy who looks like he does. He looks like a villain in a Bond movie. He just doesn't seem to fight like that and doesn't seem to be covering the market price tags that are being set for him. So I like the over in this matchup between Lane and Petrino. The over 1.5 rounds is plus 105. I also like the fight to go to a decision at about plus 400. I make that GTD line about plus 335, and I'm interested in sprinkling Lane as well at about 5-1. Spilly, I would imagine you're probably with me on the over 1.5 of anything here, but any interest in either the GTD or Lane's money line in this matchup?
I am not betting those myself because of the bet I found, which I think is a necessary condition for Lane to win or the fight to go long. And that's Austin Lane to get a takedown at plus 250. I think if he just stands in front of Vitor Petrino, who is much faster, has been striking way longer, much more technical, he's going to have a bad time. But just to get a single takedown at plus 250 is almost like, unless it's Derrick Lewis or somebody like that, that's almost just you could blind bet that in most fights and feel pretty good about it. Lane has 4 takedowns in his last 3 fights, has taken down 2 of those opponents, tried to take down Mario Pinto a couple times, but was unable to do so. I think Petrino is going to be a lot easier to take down than Mario Pinto was, and we saw Petrino lose in the grappling against Anthony Smith. So that should be the game plan for Austin Lane. His only UFC win was because he just tackled Robelis Despania a bunch of times. I think I like both of your bets. If I had to pick those and couldn't take this prop, absolutely would. I just think for any of those things to happen, he's got to get a takedown. And he can get a takedown, but then later get knocked out, or the fight not to go over 1.5, or any of those other things. So plus 250 on the over half a takedown. I am realizing I technically put this in the wrong spot of our show sheet, so my apologies to you. But I wanted to do that because I knew we'd both be talking about him in the underdog section. And it's plus money, so it's still an underdog pick, even if it's not a money line.
No, that's a great bet. I think Lane almost needs a takedown in order for this fight to go over. or to go to a decision.
Right.
At the minimum, he's going to need extended cage control probably in order to do that. And I think Petrino could fight him off in the clinch. It's a matter of getting taken down, getting held on his back, clock being killed out a little bit from there. So yeah, I think that's a very sharp bet. Lane takedown at plus 250. I think you need that in order to hit the GTD or the over. I think if you could same game parlay that, if you're able to combine that with the over or the GTD, obviously
they let you do all those.
Yeah, exactly. Because the fight, the longer a fight goes, the more chances you have for a takedown, etc. Like they're not going to give you the ability to do that. But any sort of overs on this fight, over takedowns, over significant strikes, things like that. I think everything could be a little bit low based upon how I expect this one to play out. Lane does not have a good chin, but Petrino, as I said, couldn't even finish Tyson Pedro. I think his finishing abilities are just in general a little bit overrated. He looks like a big, tough, strong dude. Moving up to heavyweight now, going to be a little bit tougher to put opponents away when he hasn't done it at 205. Also, curious to see what he looks like physically on the scales. I know he weighed in at about 245, but I didn't actually see what he looked like. And he was never a guy who had great cardio at light heavyweight either. So it's really a trade-off of like, is he going to look better not having cutting weight, or is he just going to look chubby and, like not in shape because he didn't cut weight? There's always that trade-off when guys move up from 205 to heavyweight as well. So what are your thoughts on him potentially adding 40 pounds here? Do you think it helps his gas tank? Do you think it hurts his speed? What's your feel for that?
That is the crucial question for a couple fights on this card, because we have guys going in both directions from heavyweight to light heavyweight. I truly don't know. I was surprised, though. Petrino weighed in heavier than Austin Lane by like 3 or 4 pounds, which that scares me a little bit, just because I'd like to see, like we saw it with Jailton Almeida, where he came in at like 225 his first one, then 235. Like he kind of gradually built up to it. And now all of a sudden, like in the cage, he's probably going to be 20 pounds heavier than he's ever fought before. That's a lot of extra weight to carry, and probably does hurt you the later the fight goes on. So I'm not, as you pointed out, like, does not cutting the weight outweigh being heavier, pun intended there? Maybe, but like, given how rapidly he put all that weight on, I don't love it. I like when guys do a little bit more of a gradual. Even Kennedy Nezachukwu, who we'll talk about shortly, I believe kind of had a transitional fight where he weighed in between the two when he first came up to heavyweight. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, Kennedy's
his first heavyweight was he was 241 his first heavyweight fight, and 236. So he's, not quite as big, not getting quite as heavy as Vitor Petrino, which I think is probably the way to do it, or to put that weight on gradually.
Yeah, speaking of Kennedy Nzechukwu, weighed in at 238 for his fight against Walter Walker. Walker coming in at 244.5 pounds. So slight weight advantage for Walter Walker, but he does have all of the grappling upside in this matchup, which is why I like him at plus money. Tick bet about plus 185. I like him down to about plus 170. And I also like his submission prop at plus 650 as well. Kennedy is the taller, longer fighter, 5-inch reach advantage. He is the better striker as well. But as I said, Walker has all of the grappling upside in this matchup. He attempts about 6 takedowns per 5 minutes spent at distance. Kennedy's had good takedown defense in his career, 83%, but controlled just 50% of positions on the ground. Walker has controlled 94% of grappling positions. So if Walker's able to get him down, I think he keeps him down for extended control time, if not finishes the fight via submission. I also like this fight to end inside the distance at minus 150 as well, projected that closer to minus 175. I think Kennedy could absolutely finish Walker on the feet, in addition to getting finished himself on the mats. Billy, Walker money line to about plus 170, sub plus 650, ends inside the distance, minus 150. Any of those 3 bets you like on this matchup?
The sub for sure. I was trying to look up while you were talking if anyone had the specific submission method bets, because he's won 2 in a row by the heel hook. Yeah, I couldn't find it on any books right now as I was looking. If I was going to bet this one, I'd probably just bet the heel hook prop, just kind of for the bit at this point, because you'd think it'd have to be like plus 10,000 or something if we were setting fair odds, which maybe they're onto that. But yeah, I think the sub is the sharpest of those. Kennedy should probably win a decision just by outpointing him on the feet. Got a lot of height and reach. Is a better striker. Don't really see Walter Walker knocking him out. He could knock him out on the ground, I suppose, but don't see it happening standing. So I think the submission should be a bigger proportion of his win condition. So I like that one. Again, it'd be fun if he got another heel hook, because we've seen so few in the past like 10 years, and I think pretty much all of them are Walter Walker and Ryan Hall.
Yeah, a lot of people drop for them. Walker is the only guy who's been able to actually finish a fight with it. Looking for a heavyweight fight to finish, by the way. As I said, this fight is juiced to end inside the distance. The main event between Lewis and Teixeira is juiced to end inside the distance. We haven't had a heavyweight fight finish since March 15th of 2025. It's been 3 months since we've had a heavyweight finish in the UFC. I believe over 20 fights have occurred. A lot of those have gone over. Part of the reason I'm continuing to bet these heavyweight overs, they've gone to decision about a 48% clip, 3-round heavyweight fights over the past 3 years. The UFC has cut a lot of their heavyweights. The division is much smaller now, much less talented than it used to be. A lot of guys getting called up, like Alvin Hines last week. A lot of guys getting brought up regionally who don't necessarily belong there, but are fighting guys who are not like, absolute world beaters because they've cut the division down so deeply. So yeah, just in general, the heavyweight division, not nearly as good as it used to be, but as a result, the finishes just are not materializing either. But this is one matchup that looks pretty binary, where I think a finish is likely to occur. Another matchup that I think a finish could occur, though it is a fight that is juiced to go to a decision, but Jake Matthews against Chidi Njokuani. Chidi 3 inches taller, 7-inch reach advantage. He's humongous for welterweight, but Matthews should have the grappling advantage in this fight. I'm just not sure whether he's going to be able to take Chidi down. Chidi is absolutely humongous, undefeated at 170 pounds. You, though, like the underdog in this matchup, Jake Matthews at about plus 140 in a fight that opened closer to a pick'em. You're done waiting for this line to continue to go up, I assume. So where's your price target on Matthews? What are you betting it down to?
Yeah, I think I need the plus 130. I'm assuming it'll still creep up a little bit, I think. I don't know why it would suddenly reverse last minute here. I think anything north of plus 120 or so. I know Chidi is undefeated at welterweight, and like the results have been solid, but he hasn't looked great. Like he needed a split decision to beat Reese McKee. Decision against Jared Gooden, not very confidence inspiring. And then he missed weight against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, who was very, very old when that fight happened. 38, yeah. Chidi's also getting up there in years, and I don't love these tall, long guys cutting so much weight as they get older. Like I worry about durability and like injury type stuff. Corey Hill style, Anderson Silva, another tall, lanky guy for the division who cut a good amount of weight. That concerns me. Although it looks like it just came in that Chidi missed weight again, so maybe he's not actually cutting that much weight to make 170. I will say this is the kind of weight miss that I like to bet against. He was 171 and a half. That means he didn't give up. He was desperately trying to make it. He knew he missed last time. He knew people are going to be mad at him. He drained himself to the absolute maximum and missed by half a pound. That is a lot different than when a guy stops cutting at 174 or whatever and just says, screw it, I'll give him my 20%. This is the kind that actually really does benefit the opponent. Jake Matthews fairly durable. If he doesn't get knocked out early by Chidi, I think he should take over pretty easily here, especially with the weight cutting factor. Also makes him a good live bet, but yeah, I'm feeling better about my Jake Matthews bet seeing this weigh-in results than I was when I made it a couple hours ago.
Yeah, I'll absolutely be betting Matthews live after round one, considering Chidi's weight miss. Chidi's never had the best cardio, is super dangerous given the size, but the weight cut should drain some of that power and will certainly hurt his stamina down the stretch as well. So Jake Matthews live after round one. Once he figures out the height and reach advantage, I think he should take over that fight down the stretch. One more underdog play, which is also going to lead into one of my props for this weekend. That's Nate Landwehr, Nate the Train, at plus 220 against Morgan Charriere at minus 270. Nate is from Clarksville, Tennessee, which is just an hour outside of Nashville. So I'm sure he'll have people in the building, but the crowd will also be behind him as well. And for that reason, I think he's a good bet to both win by decision at plus 450 and to win by split decision at 10-1 with the home crowd behind him as a high volume, high paced fighter going against Charriere, who tends to be a little bit low volume at times. Landwehr outlands opponents, or Landwehr lands about 5.6 strikes per minute at distance, Charriere about 4.8. So I do think Landwehr should have a slight volume edge in this matchup. Charriere a little bit more efficient with his strikes, a little bit better defensively, and does carry a little bit more power, but I'll take the hometown fighter on the decision props. As I said, plus 450 to win by decision, 10-1 to win by split decision for Nate the Train. You're just going to go ahead, though, and take Nate the Train on the money line. Should have some submission upside here. I don't know if he can knock out Sherrier, but should be a high-paced fight, relatively high variance. You like Nate the Train on the money line. Where do you like him down to?
I don't know. If you're not betting Nate the Train here, like, this sport isn't for you, right? Like, it's Nate Landwehr in Tennessee. He's the most fun dude. I would have, like, we all want to see him get on the mic in Tennessee of all places, first of all. So I was never not going to bet Nate Landwehr in this spot, kind of regardless. I did watch some tape on it, though, so this isn't me coming in totally blind. Couple things I noticed. Sherrier in the UFC has either won by knockout or lost decisions. Mm-hmm. If you look at Nate Landwehr's record, there's a couple knockout losses on there. One was a kind of fluky flying knee. The last one against Doohoo Choi, he didn't really get knocked out. He didn't even take that much damage. He was just stuck in bottom crucifix, and it was very obvious he wasn't going to get out, so the ref jumped in and saved him at the end of the fight. Rumor has it he was both sick and dealing with a broken hand in that fight, which if you watch it back, he was trying to throw a lot of elbows at range, which kind of makes sense if his hand was broken. Again, I'm backwards rationalizing to an extent because I really want to be on Nate Landwehr here, but those things all check out. The reason I'm not going decision is because of that submission upside. It's not just that he has submission upside, it's that he has a really good front headlock series. Sherrier has done well to mix in his grappling and get some takedowns. That's like kind of revitalized his career, I would argue, is when he started mixing in takedowns. But if he shoots and gets stuffed, he's in that perfect position for Anaconda's, Darce's, Nate to spin and take the back. That's all the stuff he does really well. So I'm actually on top of Nate's money line. I'm going to take a flyer on Landwehr by submission. I saw plus 1,500 out there, which is, it's unlikely. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but plus, 15 to 1 odds. And how can you not root for Nate the Train in Tennessee? Look at those biceps, all the greatness that we're going to get out of him on the mic. You got to do it, right? Like, I don't know any better way to put it other than we need this to happen against a French dude in Tennessee.
Yeah, just to my point about the decision equity as well, obviously, French dude, Tennessee against the local native, like crowd obviously going to be Landwehr partisan, but also Sherrier has 9 split or majority decisions in 15 career decisions, and he's 5-10 on the scorecards. He is not a good point fighter. Mm-hmm. He's 12 knockouts, never been knocked out, has been submitted once, has a few submissions of his own, but 5-10 career on the scorecards, and 9 of those 15 decisions were split or majority. That just speaks to low volume, constantly in close fights. And oh, by the way, pretty easy to click on plus 220 against the guy who is constantly going to split decisions and never pulling away from opponents. I think Landwehr decision only could be an interesting bet as well. I have not looked at that market, but I would imagine he's probably a value bet in the decision only market as well. If this one goes all 15 minutes, hard to imagine Landwehr not seeing his hand raised unless he gets knocked down, I would imagine, in separate rounds. One total that we both like this weekend, it is not a heavyweight bout. It's a light heavyweight bout because just Junior Tapa is moving down from heavyweight to light heavyweight to face Tuco Tokos. But I do like this fight to go over, potentially to go the distance as well. Tokos is full grappling upside. I think I'm actually more concerned about him potentially finishing Tafa via submission in the first 7.5 minutes than I am about Tafa knocking him out. But light heavyweight average, fights go to decision about a 39% clip, which is plus 156 implied. I projected this one at plus 250. They're giving you 4-1 on this fight to GTD, and then plus money, plus 105 on the over 1.5. So I'll play the over 1.5 here and then also sprinkle the GTD prop at plus 400. Billy, you like this fight to go over as well, I believe, because you also like Tokos to win at any point after the first round, at any point after 7.5 minutes, I believe. So how are you playing this one specifically? Are you live betting Tokos after one, and then any other ways you're playing it?
Yeah, so what I specifically, and I did the full breakdown for this one, which will be out Saturday morning, is Tokos in over 4.5 minutes in an SGP. That gets you to plus 255. I think you could play with that up or down kind of to any point, and it would still be a solid bet. Not only do I think Tokos is going to win, I think him winning heavily correlates with this fight going long. Tafa had terrible cardio at heavyweight. This gets us into that discussion again. Now he's a light heavyweight. Does carrying less weight help him more than the weight cut hurts him? I don't know. His cardio was so bad, though, that even if it helps him a little bit, I'm still worried if this fight goes long. Like, he was fighting a guy who took the fight on 2 days' notice. in his last fight, and they both were totally gassed, and Tafa just happened to land one or two more in the second round. Tafa also terrible grappler. Like, if he gets on bottom, he was nearly finished in that last fight, saved by the bell at the end of the first round. I don't love fighters going from heavyweight to 205 just because the skill level is higher and the speed is higher at the lighter weight classes. I think the hope, if you're Tafa, is that these guys aren't so much bigger than me anymore. I'll finally be able to defend takedowns. Tuckos is still bigger than him. He's taller and longer. I bet if we weighed him in on Fight Night, Tuckos would still be heavier. And he's a much better grappler than most of the people Tafa fought at heavyweight. So I think it's a bad fight for Tafa. And I just think, Tafa's going to be dangerous early. So therefore, a Tuckos win correlates with the fight going long. I'd be fine with Tuckos on the money line, but add some amount of over in there. You could do over half a round, over 3.5 minutes. Anything in there to get a little bit better odds I like. I'm going to be kicking myself, like you said, if there's a late first round finish for Tuckos, which is entirely possible. But he's not in super aggressive hunting those things. He's more of a control grappler, as we saw against Navajo Sterling. I think that's probably his likeliest plan early.
Got a couple of more GTD props that I like, and then I'm going to throw it to you for an ITD prop before we move on to our best bets where we're head-to-head. But Mike Davis is a -900 favorite against Mitch Ramirez this weekend. I'm a big Mike Davis fan. Really good documentary you could find on YouTube when Mike Davis went to train at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand, and they basically just go through like all these guys trying out to get a free year. I think it's a free 6 months living there, training there, etc. And they did like a tournament, or they put these guys through like the ringer to train them, and Davis ended up winning one of the spots there. But it was just a really cool documentary if you're into MMA, seeing like what these guys go through to try to level up in their careers. And he hasn't fought a ton in the UFC, but he's a super talented, super well-rounded fighter. His last fight against Fares Ziam was super awkward, and we talked about it with Terrence McKinney a couple weeks ago. There were other fighters who it affected. I think Davis was clearly the most affected by it. Those were the fights in Abu Dhabi with the painted dressing room, and Davis was in the same room as McKinney. I forgot who else was in that room with them, but legitimately when the fight started, Mike Davis pulled guard like right away. He looked gassed out from the opening bell, and the longer the fight went, the better he kind of looked. He didn't look great at any point throughout the fight. He looked like a severely diminished version of himself, but he did seem better the longer the fight went on, and it was almost like being out of that room and in the full-size arena was helping him to breathe a little bit better. So of all the guys who came out and commented on the fact that recently painted locker room and the paint fumes had affected them before the fight, Davis's account of it seemed by far the most believable, especially when you actually watched how he performed in the octagon. That said, he is getting into his later 30s now. I do worry about a level drop, and as a result, and he is more of a point fighter than he is a finisher. He's more of that attritional pace, like we'll just finish guys by overwhelming them as opposed to overpowering them or just having a much better submission game. So I do think he could potentially overwhelm Mitch Ramirez here, but overall, lightweight fights go to a decision about a 46% clip, about +117 implied. They're giving you +160 on this fight, and I do think there's a chance that Davis is not a -900 favorite, that he is a diminished version of what we've seen previously, and that if that is the case, this fight will be closer and more competitive than those odds indicate. And for that reason, I'm not taking Davis by decision despite the better number. I'll save that for round robin tickets. I'll just go ahead and save Davis, or I'll play the fight GTD at +160. Billy, any thoughts on Mike Davis and Mitch Ramirez? And then I've got one more GTD prop I'm going to go out.
I was looking up the Mike Davis decision line to try to hit you with a gotcha moment there, but you anticipated the question and got there. No, I agree with all that. It's easy to look at Mitch Ramirez's record and say, well, he's been knocked out in both of his UFC fights. But look at the guys he fought. He fought Carlos Prates and Thiago Moises. No real shame in that. Davis is not nearly the striker those guys are. And Prates was up a weight class, right, for Ramirez?
Yeah.
Prates fights one side. So, like, you can see how that's not the most applicable. I like that. I think you did a good job of explaining why to not take the decision line. What's the over 2.5 on that? Over 2.5 +140. Yeah, I'd take the better price and goes to a decision. So I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with an over there as well. Obviously, make sure to shop around. Sometimes you can find like the same price on the over 2.5 at one book as you can find on the GTD at another. There is enough price discrepancy from one book to the next. So just make sure to shop around, especially now with the sweepstakes books out there, the exchanges, like you get such good prices on the over 2.5 on some of those exchanges that it's the same price as taking the GTD elsewhere. So always make sure to shop around and compare the price discrepancies. Last fight though, GTD prop for me, Fatima Klein against Melissa Martinez, women's strawweight division. Women's strawweights go to a decision at about a 67% clip in 3-round fights over the past 3 years. I make this close to 70% as well, and they're giving you plus 110 on this fight GTD. It is a relatively binary striker versus grappler matchup. If Martinez does not get submitted, I think this one does go all 15 minutes though. So basically you're taking plus 110 on Melissa Martinez not to get submitted. In my opinion, I think we played another women's strawweight bout pretty recently, or we played a couple bouts a few weeks ago that were both lined to end inside the distance. I think one of them was a rematch. Was it the Melissa Mullins fight or Melissa Dixon fight? It was a rematch of a previous fight that had already finished, and that one ended up going all 15 minutes as well. Or it might have been the Alexeva fight. I can't remember which woman.
It was definitely one of the Melissas, but now I can't remember which one either.
I can't recall it either. But yeah, like, you know, regardless of what the favoritism is on one side, and Klein is a minus 1,100 favorite, regardless of whether these fights have even finished before in previous iterations, I'm just going to keep leaning into the divisional average. And 2/3 of these fights go to a decision. You're giving me plus money. It's a pretty automatic play for me. Billy, anything about that fight scare you off of playing it? Do you think Klein is super likely to finish? And then after that, you've got an ITD bet on the other women's fight between Lauren Murphy and Eduardo Mora.
Yeah, what scares me is how nasty Klein looked with the ground and pound against Victoria Dudakova. And I think Dudakova is a considerably better grappler than Melissa Martinez. With a caveat, though, I think in a straight-up grappling match, Dudakova would destroy her. But Dudakova likes to hunt submissions and like to initiate the grappling, which kind of leaves you open to get ground and pounded more. Where if Melissa Martinez has any sense at all, her only thought as soon as she gets on the ground will be to get back up, which I think is probably a better approach against a fighter like Klein. So it's not as easy as saying one fighter's a better grappler, therefore you'll do worse against them. I don't think it quite works that way. I think Martinez's style is likelier to prevent a finish on the ground than Dudakova's was, but it's still scary because Fatima Klein is really good. Also, as we're talking about it, are Melissa Mullins and Melissa Dixon the same person? Was that a name change, or are these separate?
I think it was. I think it's the same person. It was a name change.
So then it was Melissa. Then it was Melissa Mullins we were talking about. You said that, and I thought about it, and I said, "Yeah, no, wait, that's the same human being that we're discussing."
Yeah, you know, it's Caitlin Chukagian will always be Chukagian to me. I can't even recall what her new name is. Nina Nunez is Nina Nunez now. Like she became Nunez, but she was Ansarov for quite a bit of time, even after changing her name. Tisha Torres, still Tisha Torres.
I struggle with Tisha Torres because we ruined the alliterative.
Sorry, I know your name's Pennington now, Tisha, but you'll just always be Tisha Torres. Also, when your nickname is the Tornado, when your nickname is Tisha the Tiny Tornado Torres, like it's going to be a little hard for you to adjust Pennington. So. One other women's fight, Lauren Murphy, coming back at 40 years old. She's 11 years older than Eduardo Mora. She's also bigger, 2 inches taller, 2-inch reach advantage, but coming off of the long layoff in her 40s, you'd like Mora to finish this fight inside the distance. Murphy's been very durable throughout her career. So was there something in the tape that pointed out to you that this would indicate a finish, or is it just the age gap?
It's mostly just the age gap. I mean, you said in her 40s, she'll be 42 later this month. So, you know, not even on the early, like, didn't just turn 40 or anything like that. I'm not sure if she officially retired and is coming back, or if she just, like, didn't fight for a while and then popped up 2.5 years later. This is probably her retirement fight. I haven't seen any indication that she is definitely retiring. The tape, though, is more on the Mora side. She finished her Contender Series win. She finished her only win in the UFC. She finished her first win in the UFC, and then has gone to 2 relatively close decisions since then. She's fairly aggressive, both with submissions and striking, is like 1,000 times better athlete than Lauren Murphy at this point, maybe not at their peaks. And it's just really hard to trust, you know, Lauren Murphy to fight through some adversity on the ground or really try to fight out a submission, anything like that, given that she's 42 and a half and probably retiring.
She is definitely retiring. She's confirmed that she will be retired after the fight. Yeah, this is a official retirement fight. She did not retire previously, but she also hasn't. year layoff, going into her retirement fight. I do lean GTD on this fight, but given, my projections lean GTD, given the fact that it's a retirement fight, I will not be betting into that personally.
I should throw out the line on that. More because that gives a little bit better context here. More inside the distance is plus 270 for a fighter who's like minus 700 or so money line, which is almost, it's hard to not take that even without the other information on it. So I'm not saying she's likeliest to finish this fight, but I think she's a lot likelier than plus 270.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Again, the retirement angle, sometimes you see fighters like try extra hard not to get finished in retirement fights. Sometimes you just see them like ready to walk out the door, just ready to lay down the gloves. And sure, the moment you get in a crucifix, I'm just going to give up and let you pound me out. So yeah, it could go either way with the retirement fight angle. I don't want to lean too hard into her fighting extra because she doesn't want to get finished in her last fight or the other direction. But certainly do not love or would not bet on a fighter going into their retirement fight. Let's talk about a fight that we were head-to-head on, though. And we are not often head-to-head on a fight. Felt good to put this one in the best bet section because I feel like we're both particularly confident on our reads here. So that is going to be Calvin Kattar against Steve Garcia, my favorite fight on the card. This is an absolute banger because there is not a 14-year age gap between these two. And it is actually like a well-matched pairing. But so here's my perspective on it, and happy to let Billy take his thoughts and run away with it. Curious if he saw something on tape. So Garcia was just a little bit too public for me this week, but more so, Garcia on a 5-fight winning streak, all by knockout. In the lightweight division, to me, not necessarily repeatable. Obviously, has great power. There's only so long that you can go knocking dudes out one fight after another. And I do think as a result of recording 5 straight knockouts, he has built up a little bit of fade equity. Kattar, on the other hand, has lost 4 of his past 6 fights. He's never been knocked down in his career. He's never been finished by strikes. His only loss via finish was a TKO loss, injury TKO. I thought he won the Josh Emmett fight. Obviously, he had the injury loss to Allen, came back, not fully recovered against Aljamain Sterling, got taken down a bunch in that fight. That fight has no bearing on this one. Then he fought Yusuf Zalal. Zalal is a very good counterpuncher, very athletic. Kattar denied all the takedowns in that fight, but also had to chase Zalal around the cage for the entirety of that matchup. Steve Garcia is going to run right at Calvin Kattar. They're going to box in the pocket. They're going to swing it out. And by the nature of the stylistic matchup, the line, I think, is correct in that this should be close to a pick'em. It's very tough to make either guy a big favorite here because it should be a pocket boxing match. That said, I prefer Kattar striking. I think he's the more diverse striker. I think he's the better pocket boxer. Garcia is a little bit bigger, carries a little bit more power, but he is not as durable as Calvin Kattar. And that's where I prefer Kattar in this fight. That's ultimately why I land on Kattar. Garcia has been dropped. He's been dropped twice. He got dropped at twice and KO'd by Mahashat, got dropped by Shailin Nurumbeki, and also got grappled in previous fights as well. And I think there's a chance that Kattar could mix in a takedown here and get a few minutes of top time. That's what he did in order to defeat Giga Chikadze. Got on top of him the first round, elbowed him a bunch, controlled him for 3 minutes. We've seen Mel Costa control Garcia for 4.5 minutes. Shailin controlled him for 3.5 minutes. My point here is mostly Kattar has been defending takedowns, had to anti-grapple in his past couple fights. Now he's going to be getting a brawl in the pocket against another guy who wants to brawl with him. And if anybody has takedown upside in this matchup, for me, it's Calvin Kattar. I'm curious if you saw something else in the grappling that would point the other direction. But yeah, I think Cater's undervalued. I make him about, I think, minus 110. I make him minus 120. I bet him to minus 110, but I also like the GTD as well. I make the GTD about minus 114. They're giving you as high as plus 190 on this fight to go to a decision. I think it's close and competitive. I think it goes all 15 minutes. I prefer Kattar, and I like to mix Kattar with the GTD prop in a combined structured bet. You're going the other direction with Garcia and Garcia by KO, Billy. Garcia KO is plus 210. Garcia money line is minus 125. Give me your price targets on those bets. And then also I'm curious if this does go 15 minutes, who you think is likelier to win a decision?
Yeah, so I'll start with your last question because I 100% agree with you that if it does go 15 minutes, I think Calvin Kattar is much likelier to win. I don't disagree with either of your bets. I would just put them together. I would just bet Kattar by decision if I was on that side of things. Yes, Garcia has struggled with durability a little bit, but he's not like one of those guys who we view as super chinny. You know, he's fought some tough guys who've done that to him. I don't think that's the likeliest outcome. And Kattar is more of a volume finisher, attritional finisher, however we want to put it, who's fought a lot of 5-minute fights, and I don't know that he'll have the pace in a 5-round fight. I don't know if he'll have the pace in a 3-round fight to like build up that volume the same way. Like he should have adjusted by now, but that's a tricky thing to do once guys get used to the 25-minute fights. The biggest thing for me is that, you know, your analysis is banking on Kattar's durability, which has been excellent throughout his career. Never even been dropped in the UFC outside of the injury. He did get finished one time other than that, though. He got submitted way back in 2008 when he was like probably a high school senior. So I'm not putting too much faith in that either. But he's also taken so much damage. He absorbs he absorbs 2 strikes more than he lands per minute, despite having solid percentage-wise defense, because he just stands right there in the pocket and wants to trade with you. And he's given up height and reach against Garcia, so he's not going to be able to find that point where he can touch you, but you can't touch him. And that's where Calvin Kattar does his best work. We saw Holloway, another longer guy, set the record for most significant strikes in a UFC fight against Calvin Kattar. Great that he survived that, but you can only survive so many of those before those start to add up. The other technical or stylistic thing I saw is Kattar doesn't fight great moving backwards. And when he has to fight taller people, kind of by definition, he has to back up a little bit more. I think if Garcia does his normal thing and kind of blitzes early, that puts Kattar on the back foot and puts Garcia in a good spot. If that happens and the line blows up on Kattar, I do want a live bet on him, though. Like, I think Garcia pretty much needs a finish here. My original read was I'm going to come in with a Steve Garcia pre-fight bet and then try to live bet Kattar. Then I saw a certain book has a way off market line on Garcia knockout at plus 210. Everybody else is plus 165. I'm not sure if we can name specific books on this particular podcast, but jump in the Action Network Discord where I discussed that earlier here. When you're getting a 50 cents different from every other book, it's kind of worth taking it. So I have 0.6 units or to win half a unit on Steve Garcia, money line, 0.4 units on knockout. And if I can get, so giving me a total of 1, if I can get Kattar north of plus 200 and put another half unit on it, that's what I'm going to try to do at any point. Because to all of your points, if he does survive all that, I think he's the clear A side here. I'm just not sure how many more surviving storms he has in him at almost 38 years old with some significant injuries, so much damage taken. And you mentioned this not being a big age gap. It kind of feels like it is, though. It's only 4 years, but if you would have told me these guys are 10 years apart, I would have believed it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's, you know, how much we've seen Kattar in the UFC relative to Steve Garcia. I think he's double the number of fights. The only point I want to push back on, and this applies to all Calvin Kattar fights, is the statistical data is so skewed for Kattar based off of solely the Max Holloway fight because he got outlanded by 325 strikes in that fight that it just permanently skews all of Calvin Kattar's significant strike absorbed and landed data. Right after the Holloway fight, he outlanded Giga 157 and 129 at distance, and then outlanded Josh Emmett 131 to 107 at distance. Got outlanded by Zalal 74 to 35, but as I said, he was chasing him around for much of that fight. I do have some concerns, you know, about Kattar's overall athleticism, explosiveness following the injury against Allen. It took him a while to get going against Sterling. That fight was only that fight was almost 2 years, a year and a half removed from the injury. So he should have been back near 100% by that point, and then took the next fight, I guess, like 10 months later against the Law, and still looked okay. Didn't look as explosive as he did previously. So I do think there is, you know, a potential loss of athleticism on the Kattar side that is maybe being undervalued here. But, you know, when you look at a guy on a 4-fight losing streak, lost 5 of 6, against the guy who's won 5 straight by KO, and the money line is basically a pick'em, I think something seems off to me relative to how this would normally be priced. I feel like normally Kattar would be creeping closer to 2-1 based off of like the recent results, and I do think it is appropriately lined. I actually would flip it though and make Kattar the slight favorite. Only fight we didn't get to on this card is Chris Curtis cutting back down in weight, going back down from 185 to 170, going back to welterweight here for the first time in, I believe, 5 years. Should sap his durability just a little bit, could potentially hurt his cardio, but I do think Max Griffin has largely looked washed in his recent fights. There's no bet for me on Curtis against Max Griffin. Just curious if you had anything before we get out of here.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Griffin at the price because he's 2-1 underdog, and I worry about older guy. Curtis dealt with a lot of injuries. He had a torn hamstring. He had some kind of knee thing, a hand thing. Like, seems like he can't get right. He's 38 and has had 43 professional fights. So while Griffin looks washed, might not be the only one. With all that said, I am honor bound to not bet against the Action Man while working at the Action Network. So no Max Griffin bet for me, but if I were going to bet and we're not feeling responsible for keeping a bit alive, that would be my bet. But I'm going with the bit and just abstaining from this one.
Last thing I want to get to, Billy, I saw you tweet out earlier this week. This is a much better card for DFS than it is for betting with all these heavy favorites. Yep. Is there any particular fighter or fight from a DFS perspective that you're excited about this week?
Yeah, absolutely in love with Fatima Klein. She's 9,900, which if anyone follows DFS, that's absurd. But she's going to be super low owned. And she might do the Merab thing where she threads the needle of, as to your point of this fight going to a decision, where she just racks up a ton of takedowns because Martinez keeps getting back up, and takedown score super well for DFS. I think that's a huge edge just relative to her ownership projections, but it's also just, a good challenge roster building wise, because in a perfect world, you'd play all the minus 1,000 favorites, but you obviously can't do that, so you have to make some tough decisions. Bonfim, I think, is a really good spot as well. He's a little bit cheaper than the heavy favorites, but given the takedown upside and the finishing upside, I think he's a little bit more likely to land in the optimal lineup than somebody like Mike Davis. So honestly, like, your picks in our sheet have actually lined up perfectly with how I'm seeing it for DFS. So if you're playing DFS, you can back extrapolate from what Zerillo said, and I think come up with some pretty solid lineups.
Love that. Hopefully that means I'm going to win some money playing some DFS this weekend if I follow my own advice. But that'll do it for a UFC betting preview. You can find more UFC betting content for both Billy and myself on actionnetwork.com and in the Action Network app. And if you'd like to instantly tell some of the bets that we discussed on today's show, make sure to look for the quick slip links both in the podcast and the video description, or visit actionnetwork.com/betnow. Don't forget to download that free award-winning Action Network app and sign up for Action Pro for immediate access to expert picks and analysis. Best of luck with all your bets this weekend. Enjoy the violence. Thank you for listening. See you here next week.